Greetings. I thought it would be interesting to bring to your attention some recent events that took place in South Korea with respects to so-called adultery laws. Now, up until recently, committing adultery within the confines of unholy matrimony actually was a crime that could be prosecuted, and you could receive up to 2 years in jail as a consequence. And this is now no longer in effect. This has been debated for a long time, but yeah, basically, since 1953, there was a statute in the law. They've gotten rid of it. And there are several articles on this on the internet. I'm only going to be posting a link to two. Just read the title of one. South Korea abolishes 62-year-old law banning adultery. Shares in condom manufacturers surge. Interesting. The other one, however, is a bit more revealing. And this was probably published slightly it was published slightly prior to the actual abolition of the law itself, but nonetheless very revealing. So I'm going to read it off and then offer some commentary. A South Korea court to rule on making adultery legal. Adultery is a crime in the country, and 5,500 people have been formally charged over the past 6 years. South Korea's constitutional court is set to rule on a motion to strike down a controversial law that outlaws adultery and threatens violators with jail time. It marks the 5th time in 25 years that the apex court has considered the constitutional legality of a 1953 statute, which made South Korea one of the few non-Muslim countries to regard marital infidelity a criminal act. And the statute isn't a historical quirk that simply gathers legislative dust. In the past 6 years, close to 5,500 people have been formally arraigned on adultery charges, including nearly 900 in 2014. But the numbers are falling, and the cases that end in prison terms are increasingly rare. Whereas 216 people were jailed under the law in 2004, that figure has dropped to 42 by 2008. And since then, only 22 have found themselves behind bars, according to figures from the State Prosecution Office. The downward trend is partly a reflection of changing societal trends in a country where rapid modernization has frequently clashed with traditionally conservative norms. In April last year, South Korea blocked the newly launched Korean version of the global adultery hookup site, Ashley Madison, saying it threatened family values. Adultery can only be prosecuted on complaint from an injured party, and in any case, is closed immediately if the plaintiff drops the charge, a common occurrence that often involves a financial statement. The law is grounded in belief that adultery challenges the social order and damages families, but critics insist that it is an outdated piece of legislation that represents state overreach into people's private lives. The debate over its future has simmered away for some time, bubbling over from time to time, especially if a public figure falls foul of the statute. Such was the case in 2008 when one of the country's best-known actresses, Ok, was given an 8-month suspended sentence for adultery. Ok had unsuccessfully petitioned the Constitutional Court, arguing that the law amounted to a violation of her human rights in the name of revenge. The court had previously deliberated the issue in 1990, 1993, and 2001, and each case dismissed the effort to have it repealed. But the petitions have come even closer to securing the support of 6 members of the court's 9-judge bench required to strike the statute down. In 2008, 5 of the justices deemed the law to be unconstitutional, arguing that adultery could be condemned on moral grounds, but not as a criminal act. The law was originally designed to protect the rights of women at a time when marriage afforded them few legal rights, with most having no independent income and divorce carrying an enormous social stigma. But it has long lost that relevance, says Kim Jong-bom, a lawyer and specialist on family law. For a start, the number of female offenders has increased, and in some ways the law has become a way of naming and shaming women, Kim said. He also noted that other laws now provided women with greater legal security in their marriages and a fair division of assets in the event of divorce. Defenders of the statute say its loss would encourage sexual depravity, an argument that Kim said has not a shred of evidence as support. Okay, so gentlemen, let's go to town. Obviously, I've talked in the past a fair bit about South Korean society. It is, excluding religious Muslim countries, still one of the most conservative societies you'll find on planet Earth. And these recent occurrences are just fascinating. Bear with me. pay attention to some of the language in the article, because I have a strong suspicion that on an unconscious level, a lot of the petitioning to get rid of the law, I mean, look at the case of the actress I just mentioned, Oksori, who was convicted. The more things change, the more they say the same, right? That tired old adage we hear all the time, well, it applies here too. They openly concede that the law was originally in place to protect women from the vicious, adulterous husbands. And admittedly, many Korean men do engage in affairs, and South Korea has incredible rates of prostitution compared to some other countries. I mean, their prostitutes are everywhere. Love motels, they're called, are everywhere. I mean, you can go to a reasonably sized city that might have 2 hotels, proper hotels, and dozens of love motels that tend to be a lot cheaper as well. But what we see here is, I think ultimately, another thing about AH, just about the women's. The law originally in place to protect women, now women finding themselves as time goes on, as modernity encroaches upon South Korean society, find themselves at the short end of the stick. Oksori, once again, as an example, and many other women who themselves have committed adultery. Well, that's a problem. So what do we do about it? We get rid of the law. Now, I'm not going to offer moral commentary on whether or not adultery is immoral or not. I mean, it's totally irrelevant here. And it's also relevant whether or not it affects family values. I mean, we hear the same thing on the part of conservatives in the West, particularly in the United States. But as I said, the more things change, the more they say the same. The reasons why adultery is now legal in the sense that you can no longer go to jail for it, they have nothing to do with quote-unquote progressive morality or what have you. It has everything to do with, in all likelihood, and it's conceded in this article, with women getting the short end of the stick here. I think most of you probably didn't pay attention, but the Oksori case was a pretty major case, and as she petitioned the Constitutional Court and claiming that it was a violation of her human rights. Right? Imagine if a man had done that. No man would do that, particularly in South Korean society. But we do see, once again, gynocentrism on the rise. I mean, we are on the rise, rather. It's ever present and affects and is everywhere. South Korea, the United States, Europe, it doesn't really matter. It's all about what can we do for the women's, and hey, the women's are getting the short end of the stick. Let's fix this. Yeah, I mean, look at this comment once again. The lawyer, this guy Kim Jong-bum. For a start, the number of female offenders has increased, and in some ways, the law has become a way of naming and shaming women. Well, we don't want that, do we? Nope. We need to get rid of the law. Now, there are other aspects to this, I think, and what I'm about to say, I think the other stuff I said, you could offer reasonable amounts of evidence to support the position. What I'm about to say now, though, is probably much more in the speculative realm, so be warned, this is speculation, but I think what we're seeing culturally across the globe is a genuine transformation to a kind of monoculture, if you will. I'm coining this phrase right here. I don't know if it's applicable and ever actually true. But, what I call the mechanization effect, which had such a profound effect on human relationships, and not just male and female relationships, the very nature of friendship, the way humans interact. This could be and probably will be the topic of another title. The fact that we have the internet that's ever present. It's really changed the game. It's changed the way the world operates and society operates. There's no doubt about that. And I think we are heading towards a kind of monoculture. That's not to say that there won't be distinctions in cuisine and obvious distinctions in language and what have you. But the common practices that humans engage in, adultery, hooking up, all of these things, they're becoming normalized in societies that frankly, never really embraced those concepts. South Korea being a perfect example of this. I mean, still quite conservative, but that conservatism is eroding quickly. I still try to keep abreast of events going on in South Korea. It's a kind of passing interest of mine. And you see this in other places as well. I mean, Japan, another example. But when I talk about a monoculture, I'm talking not about cuisines being identical and languages being identical, but a kind of acceptance of behavioral trends that all human beings engage in. I mean, all human beings cheat to varying degrees in romantic relationships, both men and women, albeit for different reasons. The interaction people have with each other, etc. This is sort of morphing into something that's almost universal. And it kind of dovetails well with what we talked about the other day with High Lord Coltane, cane-toed clubber, and container of bogans. That ideal is, and in air quotes, is whatever human beings are naturally inclined to. And society is slowly transforming into something, this monoculture, if you will, where all the practices that human beings are naturally inclined towards and naturally inclined to engage in are being normalized. There are no longer proscriptions against them. For example, I mean, it's a perfect example with this adultery law. Yes, certainly gynocentrism is an important element here, and I think probably the primary factor in striking down the law. That is, women were getting the short end of the stick. They were getting fucked over because they're cheating too. Oh, we need to fix this. Let's not make it illegal anymore. But given that human beings are naturally inclined to have illicit, quote unquote, illicit affairs, given that marriage is universally a very shaky institution, and certainly in the context of South Korea, I already talked about the effect that the South Korean / Southeast Asian economic crisis in the late 90s, in a much earlier video of mine, had on divorce rates. They just went through the roof. All of these things are just normal, are behavioral norms essentially. And what we see is a loosening up of restrictions on those and proscriptions against those globally, and everything is sort of turning into this monoculture. Once again, I'm not saying that all cultures are the same in the sense that food, cuisine, language, and even customs, but the very basics of humans, the very basic human behavioral traits that seem to unite us all, these are where there used to be restrictions on them. These are being loosened up, and it's turning into a kind of monoculture. And I think a great deal of this has to do with the internet, the transformation of society. It's invisible. You can't actually trace it in a sense that this happened, X led to Y and led to Z, and all of a sudden, boom, we have this monoculture. But we are connected to each other in a way that has never been possible previously in history. Nobody writes letters anymore. Well, with the exception of my father, maybe. But people can instantly get in contact with each other. Information spreads at light speed. I'm using light speed obviously metaphorically here, etc. And this is turning into, over time, this monoculture that I think is, as I said, speculation. But I think a lot of the norms that are very much present in Western culture, hookup culture, infidelity in marriage, the fragility of marriage and things falling apart and what have you. I mean, this is spreading worldwide to formerly conservative societies such as South Korea, and a lot of it has to do with the internet and just a confluence of different factors, but so much input from elsewhere, and just the natural path that humans take when societies change, and due to all this technology, as I've called it, as I said before, the mechanization effect. Of course, striking down the law here has a lot to do with gynocentrism and people worried about the women's, or rather women worrying about let's be more specific here. The Oksori case was really big. She set an example. Other women complained. And men do what they always do. They kowtow to women's desires, and we get rid of the law. That's how it works. I doubt we would see any action taken if men complained about it. No, this was about women getting their divorce settlements and not having to go to jail if they happen to cheat on their husbands. It's simple as that. But even though we don't see a court system yet in South Korea, the family court system similar to the Western model, or particularly the Anglo-Western model, it's a distinct possibility that could occur. Remember, once again, as Coltain and I mentioned the other day, ideal in some sense is a bit of a misnomer. Ideal is often conflated with best. In this context, ideal is simply, what are human beings most naturally inclined to do, and what are they most naturally inclined to participate in? And this seems to be a human universal. So monoculture, if I continue to use the term, is simply the natural development of human society worldwide, following natural inclinations, natural behavioral traits, etc. It's, as I said, distinct from linguistic differences in cuisine and what have you, and historical mumbo jumbo. No, but all human beings seem to walk this path. Ultimately, what you do have is sometimes interference coming from the historical past, coming from former customs. And of course, this doesn't apply to very strict Muslim countries for obvious reasons. But in secular countries, at least constitutionally speaking, government, we're going to see more and more and more of this. I mean, I still keep abreast of South Korean affairs. It's been 7 years since I've been there. But I've been told, and I suspect that even compared to 7 years ago, the country has changed completely. That is to say, not necessarily in its infrastructure, although I've heard that's changed as well, but more in terms of how people interact, how they go about their business. It's loosened up. The moral frigidness that used to be present there, if you will, the conservative element is dissolving slowly but surely. And as I said, the internet has a lot to do with this. So I think we're heading towards this monoculture, and I might make an entire video on that as I gather more evidence for this. But in this particular case, we can also say that part of this monoculture will always be the gynocentrism that is endemic to human beings. And in this context, it's, women complain about something and men try to fix whatever women are complaining about. Women don't like getting jail time for cheating. Well, get rid of the law. Simple as that. So I'm going to wrap it up here, but some things to think about. Once again, universality of the way human beings act towards each other. Women complain, men give them what they want. And also a kind of, as I said, this monoculture that really seems almost identical in practice, because human beings, when it comes to the basic behavioral traits, are identical. It doesn't matter if they're in Australia, South Korea, Japan, the United States, Canada, Venezuela, wherever. Human beings do this sort of thing. They cheat, and I think marriage is certainly an outdated institution, but it just shows how fragile it is when marriage, and even in a place like South Korea, which is still one of the most conservative countries in the world, is really on the rocks, especially in light of this. And don't forget, condom shares surge after this. So, thanks for watching, gentlemen. I just want to mention a whole bunch of stuff in the works, and I just, my classic flaw is I devote a lot of attention to one thing, and then I get caught up in something else. I'm specifically referring to scripting videos. I work on one video, and then there's something else I want to work on, and it's kind of crazy like that. But a bunch of different videos in the works. I don't know exactly when they're going to be released, but I want to do one language related one, because some people like that. Another one which is going to be a pretty long one, I think, if I ever get it done, which is going to be covering the topic of sort of moral atrocity in the context of government and societal cohesion and conformity. It's kind of a complicated topic, but wait for the video. Eventually it'll come out. As always, thanks for watching and enjoy your week. Bye-bye.